Folks, thanks for bearing with me. It's been a minute since I've been uh, on the platform recording other videos. And tonight I'm going to do a video which talks about bribery and the resulting corruption that arises from it. And I'm asking the question of the part bribery plays in the situation we all find ourselves in, not just in one corner of the world or the other, but generally across the entire planet. I'm asking the part bribery plays in our present predicament. I think the first thing that I need to say is that this isn't about politics. Um, Everything I write, talk about, and engage with is actually completely apolitical, though politics and economics are fundamental facets of our daily lives. I'm far more about people awakening to their natural born, inbuilt, inherent sovereignty as human beings. So all of my work is about raising people's consciousness to become cognizant of their dignity and their sovereignty as human beings. So, this being the case, I don't often make the calculus of what is politically astute. I'm far more about finding out because it takes investigation, seeking out information to discover what the truth of our world genuinely is. Because everybody else is doing politics, there is a lot of construction which goes on. And as one very famous commentator, David Icke, says, it's difficult for us ordinary people to join up the dots amidst this pea soup of fabrication, half truth, innuendo, and so on. So we all like to blame politicians for doing just those things. Doesn't matter where you are. If you look at statistics which are coming out now, it looks as if human beings all over the world have massively fallen out of love with their politicians. I mean, when I was a little boy, basically you looked up to your politicians, you gave them a lot of trust, you gave them a lot of respect, and expected them to bat for you, to do that which was in your, for the sake of your welfare, for the progress of your society. And I think now, whenever politicians open their mouths, people wonder which part of what they're saying is the truth, if any at all. So the reason politicians have to do that is that they're constantly working out what they can get away with. I remember when I was a child, my mother used to say, my mother was a teacher and later on something of a successful entrepreneur in her own right. She always used to say that the thing about business people is that you always know what they're about. Everybody understands that a businessman is out to make a buck. They're in it for the profit. But politicians will come along and tell you that they're in it for your welfare. And as a result, we hold them really to a far higher standard of probity, conscience, and so on, which sadly, if the truth of the evidence of our eyes is anything to go by, they fall desperately short in meeting. So, talking about bribery, and you can't say the word bribery without its half brother or half sister, or call it what you will, which is corruption. You can't say the word bribery without mentioning corruption, because people are bribed usually to circumvent some truth, some value which can be created, or other, so that a political expedient can be met. But it's not just in the realm of politics, it's in the realm of our daily lives as well. So I identify three major bribes that have been thrown out to humanity, and they have been really ramped up, a sip on steroids. The three big bribes are: one, the bribe of gender, in that privileges are ascribed to people purely and simply, or they have been increasingly ascribed to people, just on the grounds of gender. This is something which has mostly been driven by the Christian supported, other religions supported notions of patriarchy, so that to be born with my characteristics and my gender as a male, willy nilly ipso facto means that I am born with a certain kind of privilege. And when people have privileges, they don't usually give them up. They have to be ripped often from their grasp until the human being, the individual, recognizes that they are operating under some regime of false privilege, which has no validation in justice, in equity, or anything like that. So the first big bribe that's used to coerce people into action is by an appeal to their gender. The second one is, generally speaking, what I call class, but can be broken down in a multiplicity of ways, such as your caste in certain cultures, your religion in others, your status of final educational attainment in others, the amount of money you've got in the bank, who your parents are, who your family is, what line of business you're involved with. All of these things have a way of determining your class. And with that class, a raft of privileges which are associated with it, which are, again, a way of setting you above other human beings. So that it, in every constitution, it's said that we're all equal, but the truth is some people are clearly more equal than others. So that's the issue of class. Then there's the third one, which I personally think is the biggest driver of privilege, and that is race. Although race is used as a misnomer here, because actually all the people who are genus Homo sapiens sapiens, which is you and I, we're all one race. There is only one human race. But race has become such a divisive force that even within the races, hierarchies have been created. And generally speaking, owing to the fact that the Western cultures, by Western I mean based on Western European cultures, have been ascribed the greatest privileges of all. And this is derived from their military prowess, technological achievements, and other things. But of course, if we could say that just because somebody went to an elite university, if we could say that because somebody um, is of a certain gender, if we could say that because somebody is of a certain age, they were worth more than another, then it might be okay to say that, well, if you're more aggressive and more destructive, say militarily, than anybody else, then you are worth more. Then you would understand why um, Western European people have been put on the top of this totem pole of universal earthly worth. But of course, it is foolishness. And I would argue that most ordinary human beings would be ashamed to say that they valued this person more than that person on account of their ethnicity or their quote unquote race. Now, the only value, by the way, there's this guy, this Portuguese writer, I think it was around about 1450. It is so recently that I've heard about him that I still haven't memorized his name. His name was Gomes de Zurara, Portuguese writer. In 1453, he wrote a book called The Beastly Race. He was commissioned to write this book by the Portuguese king because he had not long before that embarked on often quite a genocidal program of enslavement of people. And he needed a justification which pulled together the religious arguments, the sociological arguments, the cultural arguments, the intellectual arguments for quote unquote proving that one race was superior to another. And he started something there because it went on, um, carried on by the Nazis to the extent where the Nazis espoused this notion of the Aryans being the natural leaders of all of mankind. And one has to say that there have been other such hugely racist philosophies which have abounded. But it is curious that even though so much of our society is based on racial discrimination, people are ashamed to acknowledge that this is so. And people um, mask their racism um, with acts of uh, denial, with acts of minimization, and all kinds of plots and ploys um, to to mask the fact that actually they are indeed deeply racist, and that one of the biggest contributions of Western civilization has been the 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 establishment of this totem pole of racial hierarchy and racial worth, taken to the nth degree, of course, by Herr Hitler and his Nazi party based in Germany. Now, just as Gomes de Zurara was uh, used to justify the notion that some human beings were inherently worth less than others, so that the Portuguese could then embark on an orgy of enslavement and its attending genocides. Um, the people who persist with this thinking tend to use it as a means of dividing people so that they can better be ruled. Now, it doesn't take a huge intellect to work out the fact that if you bribe somebody with the idea that just because of the color of their skin or the passport that they hold, or the nationality that they can claim, that in and of itself makes them more worthy and more superior. Those people who, under normal temperature and pressure, might well have perfectly good moral values and ethics about equality in their lives, those people can then be prevailed upon to turn a blind eye to when racism is being pursued. Recently, with the events that are going on in Gaza, um, actions are being taken which a good proportion of this world, I would say the vast majority of people in the world, are considering the treatment of the Palestinians in Gaza as a genocide. The South African government has brought charges of war crimes and genocide and apartheid government in contravention of human rights laws, treaties, which we have all signed years ago, against the government of Israel. And so it is that everybody knows that this philosophy of racism is completely indefensible in morality, ethics, and actually what is even known of humanity. I mean, so much depends on opportunity. And if the opportunity is given to a human being, you'll be staggered at what they'd achieve. A lot depends on the environment a person is in. And of course, the environment a person is in is part of a chain of reactions to the ways that those with current privilege act to maintain those privileges. And more importantly, I would say now, how they encourage their own people to be not ignorant, but ignorant of public policy, foreign policy, economic policy, financial policy, which actually keeps other countries down at heel so that the perpetrating country will make its profits and maintain its top dog position. Now, it wouldn't work very well for the former colonial powers if their people came out in the streets and said, chaps, you got to stop this rubbish. We know it's unjust. It flies completely in the face of most of our ethics as people of religion, as people of ethics, as people of justice, and so on and so forth. But of course, if they did that, their governments would have to row back. And if their governments rowed back, the trickle that comes back into the pockets of the ordinary person would be lost. And it's a significant trickle, significant enough to enable people to feel motivated, not to want to rock the boat or bite the hand that's feeding them. So the question of bribery and the part it plays in the status quo of our world is vast. We like to think that it's only the politicians who are bribing the electorate with false promises. But actually, we ourselves are taking those bribes. And by taking those bribes, say, for example, of, um, of men having certain natural inbuilt advantages in certain industries, in terms of recruitment, retention, and an advancement. If we didn't take those bribes, if we stood on the ethics, which, to be honest, in 2024, I would say most people in their hearts know and understand to be right, society would be completely transformed. And so the purpose of my post is to ask people to reconsider What bribes are you being offered to turn a blind eye to atrocities as are happening in Gaza? What bribes being offered you to turn a blind eye to the way in which a country like Congo, whose sovereign wealth, if it was just released, would make every Congolese child almost a millionaire, because unfairly, from the standpoint of creation, that country is absolutely endowed with staggering wealth, as is that whole neck of the woods in southern Africa, Congo, Namibia, South Africa. Uganda's just discovered massive deposits of gold and other minerals. But of course, if by their actions, those who have their fingers on the levers of power are constantly able to destabilize those countries, the whip hand will always remain in the West. The West will always be able to exploit those resources. Africa, from which I hail, I'm of African origin. Um, Africa exports far more wealth to the rest of the world than she keeps herself. And yet, ironically, we have this picture somehow being painted that Africa's scrounging off the rest of the world. In terms of remittances, for example, to the continent, far more aid goes to Africa from Africans living abroad in their personal remittances than could ever be paid by these programs of what are euphemistically, I call it euphemistically, because aid doesn't make the recipients wealthy. It just makes the companies that come from the countries that give the aid wealthy. That's what always happens. It has been happening since time without beginning. So there we have it. In the end, the only thing that'll decide whether you as a human being take the bribe or not is your awakening to who and what you are as a human being. Um, that awakening will make you strong enough to do what is right, not what looks good. Looking good and being good look alike, but they are as different one from the other as chalk and cheese. Secondly, to be able to rise to that sense of morality, ethics, and so on requires a cognizance of your metaphysical being, your spiritual being, because that is the conduit by which you can actually internalize the notion of, if you like, unity consciousness, internalize the notion of the worth and dignity of human life. If you don't go within, you will always measure everything by the five senses rule, which is highly binary, highly discriminatory, and by its very nature unjust. You won't be able to stand up to the difficulties that arise because you can't maintain your ethics. So there we have it. Bribery isn't just for the politicians. Bribery is what those who used to govern this world, is what those people who used to rule us offered people on a differential basis so they would turn a blind eye, a little bit like a hoodlum corrupting a copper, um, getting him to turn a blind eye so they could get along with their business. And in return, the copper would get a bit of a backhander, stuff brown envelopes, and that sort of thing. Societies all over the world are rife, replete with that sort of thing. So there we are. It's a thought. So when we strut our stuff, thinking of ourselves as saviors, as enlightened ones, as rather better than the next people, we need to understand that actually, if we opened our eyes, we would see that by acts of compliance, acts of ignorance, acts of minimization, um, acts of frank denial, we are actually as guilty as the person who is offering us that bribe. And it's something that needs to stop now because the world can't afford it anymore. Thanks very much for listening. And I hope you enjoy that. Please subscribe um, to the channel that this is coming from on YouTube. It'll also be on Rumble. And hit the notification button as well, so that when the next one comes out, you get a chance to see it. Thank you very much.